Morning, everyone. Thanks for making the time to come today. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you all to this dissemination event for our ESRC project on linking survey and Twitter data. My name is Luke Sloan. I'm a professor in the social sciences and PI on the project. I will be chairing this session. The project's been going on for about 4 years now, started a month before COVID hit, which was an interesting challenge that we've had. I've had to do lots of things throughout the project that you'll hear about today. You'll hear about some of the analysis we've done and some of the findings. You'll also hear, particularly in the later sessions, about some of the challenges we had to overcome on data sharing. The project is a collaboration between the Social Data Science Lab at Cardiff University that myself and Xu Jun is a part of, and also ISA at Essex, which Tarek, my colleague here, and Paulo, who you might see later, is part of, and NatSen. And there are lots of names at NatSen of people that have been involved in this, but most notably Curtis Jessup, who you'll also hear from later. So you can find details about the project on the project page, and we can share the link with you later. But of all the stuff we've done over the 3 to 4 years, there are some things that we really want to share with you. So today I'm chairing this panel, and we have until 12:30, which means we have lots of time. Sorry, not until 12:30, until 12, which means we have lots of time for questions. So my colleague Xu Jun and Tarek will present their pieces. And regarding questions and discussions, I think the way that's best to run it is by all means put any questions in the chat as they occur to you, but we will go back and review the questions and answer them at the end once both Xu Jun and Tarek have presented, because there is interplay between the two. And I think it's worth having a larger discussion at the end. I hope that's okay with everyone. This is the first of 3 sessions. There will be another session at 12:30. Towards the end, I'll remind everyone of that, and we'll post the link in the chat so you know when to join. So I think that's it. Just remains for me to introduce the first talk, Xu Jun Lui, who's a researcher on the project based at Cardiff, who is going to talk to you about the impact of social class and political affiliation. One of the things we really wanted to do with this project was, because we could link Twitter and survey data, we had gold standard data about socioeconomic characteristics, which you can't get very easily on Twitter. And I've spent a lot of time trying. So Xu Jun is going to explore some of that and the relationship between motives and activities and how people behave online. Xu Jun is a research associate at School of Social Sciences, Cardiff University, where she works as part of this project. Her key research interests include digital media studies, computation of social science, climate communication, and political communication. And she is exactly the perfect person to be doing this work and presenting it. So Xu Jun, I'll pass over to you. And yeah, when you're done, I'll take the session back and re-chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. I think maybe I should first share the screen. Yeah. Okay.
I have some tech troubles there, Xu Jun. You were sharing the screen, now it's gone.
Yes, the internet seems not very stable after I collecting
Of
the
course.
sharing. It just okay. Let me see here. So can you see my screen?
It says that you've started sharing. I think it's just working it out. Yes, that's it. We got it. Thank you.
Okay, sorry for the inconvenience. Hi, I'm a research associate from Cardiff University, and today I'm very honored to present understanding Twitter usage with linked data and analysis of motivations and online behavior.
Oh, lost it again. Can I can I make a suggestion, Shujan, just because there's internationals at your age? Tarek, would you mind going in now?
That's fine.
Let's give Shujan one more chance. Let's give one more chance, Shujan,
Yeah,
to fix this. Otherwise, we'll swap around and Tarek can go first.
and now you're on mute, Shuju.
Okay, we can see it again now.
It's okay. So can you see the screen, right?
And yes.
Sorry for all these troubles. And
No problem.
yes, I'm Shu Jun. I'm research associate from Cardiff University, and today I'm gonna present this study, understanding Twitter usage with linked data and analysis of motivations and online behaviors. This study is an ongoing study, and we aim to present this study as a case study to present how to use nascent linked data to carry out social science research. Now let's move to the introduction. Social networking sites are increasingly used by individuals nowadays. It enables users to communicate text updates with their network, serving not only as a tool for expressing personal opinions and thoughts, but also as a platform where individuals can engage with one another. For example, platforms like Twitter not only allow for passive consumption of content, but also active engagement, such as tweeting, retweeting, following other accounts, and engaging conversations. Uses and gratification theory rooted in communication field can be used to explain active participation of online behavior. According to this theory, media users are active participation in their media consumption, selecting and using media sources to satisfy their specific needs and desires. And in the context of the social media, this theory is particularly permanent. That means that individuals engage with social media intentionally to fulfill various needs, such as information seeking, entertainment, personal identity promotion, and social networking. In other words, users would intentionally behave on social media based on their motivations. Previous research mainly focused on if individuals use social media to satisfy their needs and leaving a gap in understanding how they behave online to satisfy various needs. The reason may be that it is difficult to objectively observing and measuring social media activities. And this study aims to fill this gap and propose two research questions. The first one is how individuals behave online to satisfy their motivations, including self-expression, seeking entertainment, business and networking, staying informed with news, and networking. And second question is how these online behaviors vary among individuals with different socioeconomic status. And to solve these questions, we innovatively linked Twitter data with survey responses. We first collected survey responses. Specifically, participants were recruited to attend a survey in December 2022 and asked to provide responses around demographic features, motivations for using social media, and socioeconomic class. Motivation for using social media was a multiple selection, which was recorded as file boundary variables. And socioeconomic class was measured using National Statistics Socioeconomic Classification and was recorded as an ordinary variable from working class, intermediate level to manager level. In addition, we inquire about the existence of a Twitter account, participants' willingness to disclose their Twitter username, and if they consent, they would be asked to provide their username. The survey continued until a total of 2,195 individuals shared their Twitter handles. And following the removal of accounts that were either suspended or non-existent, this study proceeded with a final sample of 1,915 active Twitter user. After having the Twitter username, we use Tweet package in Python and the Twitter API to collect a range of metadata for each user's Twitter account in September 2023. This included their tweet count, number of followers, and the number of followings, and the existence of bail information. This dataset was then linked with each participant's survey responses. To ensure respondents' anonymity and security, the survey data, tweet data, and the linked data were stored in separate devices and can only be accessed by a designated researcher. Now let's move to the findings of this study. Regression analysis was used to analyze the data, and the results showed that individuals with self-expression motivation tended to follow more tweet accounts, having more followers, as well as post bail information. And we also found that individuals motivated by work and business tended to post bail information. Additionally, we found that individuals who have networking motivations tended to post bail information and follow more tweet accounts. In terms of the moderating role of socioeconomic class, results showed that socioeconomic class moderated association between networking motivation and tweet account. Additionally, it also moderated association between self-expression motivation and following tweet account. Specifically for individuals with a higher socioeconomic class, motivation to networking has a less impact on tweet account, while self-expression motivation has a higher impact on following count. Now let's go into the discussion. Overall, these findings offer a nuanced understanding of social media usage, highlighting how different motivations influence specific online behaviors and further extended uses and gratification theory. And methodologically, the novel approach of linking survey with actual social media activity provides a more accurate representations of user behavior, contributing insights for academic and practical social media studies. Future research, and that is we are currently doing, could further explore the content of tweets posted by users. This involves analyzing these tweets to identify patterns that could be linked with individuals' stated motivations for using the platform. And this is the ongoing project. We are still exploring related topic. And thank you for listening. That's the end of my presentation.
Fantastic. Thanks, Xuzhen. Right. Tarek, I know I said we'd leave questions to the end, but I think we've got a bit of time in this session. And some of the questions are very specific to the data that Xuzhen's been using. So I'm going to suggest we go ahead and do those questions, if that's okay. Can you shout if you disagree? So
No, it's okay.
Fab, thanks. So there's a really good question here, and you're going to enjoy answering this, Xuzhen. So this is from Daniel. He says, how did you handle the Twitter API rate limit where you could only get a limited number of tweets per user? And did you find you were maxing out for power users?
Thank you for Daniel's questions. Yes, it is a problem that we encounter when we try to collect the tweet data. In this study, we just use the profile information, that is the metadata of Twitter users instead of tweet content. But currently, we are also collecting tweet data for each users, and we're encountering these issues. We have to encounter these limitations, and that is there's a 3,200 limit for each users. It's a limit for the professional Twitter API, but previous using the academic API, as far as I know, there's no limit. So I think that's an obstacle that Twitter cite for our researchers. Yeah.
Thanks, Eugene. I might also come in and say one of the headaches we have with this project, and lots of other Twitter projects will have suffered this, is that we fully intended to use the academic route, and then it changed. And we had to request extra funding to be able to access the data, even though we had permission. And I think this is the reality and messiness of doing data. Had we managed to collect our data even as much as 2 months earlier, it would have been free. And as it happens, it cost us several £1,000s. So yeah, it's been an interesting project. Okay, fab. Great. Thanks, Daniel. Thanks, Eugene, for the answer. There's a message here from Catherine. Catherine, I wonder if you want to expand on this. It's like, how did you edit the Twitter data? So I'm not quite sure what you mean, but maybe you can clarify. But in the meantime, Shujun, can you talk about how you accessed the profile information and then how you coded it, I guess, how you cleaned it?
I use the Twint package in Python and the Twitter API to access the Twitter profile information, and there's a specific URL for the profile information. And how to code it? Actually, Twitter will return the responses. That is exactly the information we need. That is tweet count, following count, follower count, as well as some bell information, whether the account was suspended, protected. And yes, so I think we don't need to do much editing work to process the data side, but we indeed need to do some work to to code the different data types, such as dictionary data types, JSON data types, to the clean data side with the K as the column headers.
Yes, thanks, Shujun. Catherine's gone on to ask about validation of the Twitter data. So and I will put the link in the chat actually to our project page so you can find this out, because we've written and published a bit on how we got informed consent and some of the complications. We asked people for their Twitter username or handle, and there's a whole nother paper on how many of them worked, how many of them matched, and some of them were available, some of them have been suspended. Usually did a little work around that. So there is a lot around that. If I haven't answered your question, please do come back and rephrase. We have got time. Okay, next question. I think this is probably one for me, seeing as I proposed the project. Fusion, you're let off from this. Is there a particular rationale for selecting Twitter or X? Yeah, I still haven't got used to calling it X rather than another social media platform. The answer is yes. When this project was proposed 5 years ago when we actually wrote the bid. And it was largely because Twitter is so open. And we felt that the ethical and legal situation was such that it would be easier, simpler to gather Twitter data. The academic API made it very open and very easy. We have done work with other platforms. Tarek in particular has worked with LinkedIn data. And there's lots of interesting stuff to be done around Facebook data as well. But where they're closed communities, Facebook data in particular is not broadcast, it's not closed. And it's also very interesting to note that the ethical debates around access to social media data have changed in the 5 years since we started the project. It's a moving feast. And they're even different again from when I started looking at this stuff about 8 or 9 years ago. So the rationale was accessibility and ease, but the lessons, what we learn, the linking and how we did that and how we asked for consent are intended to be generic lessons that can be shared for linking to any social media platform. And the later session in the day, I'm going to be talking about the difficulties we had in sharing that data as a team and what it means to link data and we'll be talking a little bit about archiving as well. So we might well circle around and back to that. So again, please do ask more questions if you want any clarification. Question for you, Shujun. Did you include anyone with private accounts?
Okay, for these questions that it's protected accounts in Twitter. For this study, I included private accounts that is including that is just examining the metadata of each users, because although they are protected accounts, but the profile information can still be accessed and observed even though it is protected. But for the tweet content, we did not collect their tweet content, so not including the private accounts.
Thank you. Ian, it's interesting, even though we had like informed consent from participants to do it, we couldn't physically do it, even if we wanted to. It's an ethical question of whether if someone's consenting for us to collect their data, but they're not making their data accessible, is an interesting question. Actually, there's a whole package of work here to be done on data donation and alternative ways of accessing, which this team are starting to look at, and some other people have looked at quite a lot of detail, actually. Okay. Yes, I want to point out what Curtis has put in the chat there. If anyone will ask about public attitudes to consenting, Curtis is going to be talking about that in the next session, and that is an absolutely fascinating area. I don't want to steal his thunder, but we've done cognitive interviewing with participants, question order to see the impact of what people are actually consenting to. So I'll shut up there because otherwise I will steal his thunder. But yes, do come to the next session. There's one more question, Shujun, I think, unless another one pops up. It's kind of one for all of us, really. Is the Twitter API still available after migration to X?
Actually, the it's still available, but we have to pay for it. Yes, and for the professional version, if we want to collect the tweet content. And there are also the basic version that is free, but cannot collect users' content. But as well as the academic API cannot be used and accessed currently. Yeah.
Yeah. And to give people an example of the scale of the change from academic access, which was incredibly generous, the lowest access package now, the one we had to go for, costs £5,000 a month and is limited to 1 million tweets. And anybody who's done anything with Twitter knows that 1 million tweets is not very much at all. Not so bad when you're dealing with a sample of people who have consented, so it's limited. But if you're doing anything on keyword detection, you very quickly start to go over that. Lovely. I can't see any more questions coming in, but the questions that have been asked have been amazing. So, and it makes it much better, much more interactive when people ask interesting questions. So thank you for your engagement. Thank you, Shujun. I'm going to let you off the hook
Thank
now.
you.
And we'll move across to Tarek if you want to unmute yourself and stick your video on. Okay, so I'll introduce my colleague, Tarek. Tarek is a professor of survey methodology, sorry, get it right, at the Institute of Socioeconomic Research, ISA in Essex, also Deputy Director of Understanding Society, which is one of the largest longitudinal studies in the world. His research is focused on linkage of new data sources, digital data sources to surveys, and the use of them combined. And Tarek has had a lot of experience, also run the innovation panel where we carry out survey experiments. And today he's going to talk very specifically, though, about survey behaviors and data quality. So I guess start to interrogate the idea of what is the value added of these things. Okay, Tarek, I think that, again, I'm not going to steal your thunder by saying what you're going to talk about. So please go ahead.
So now I hope that the screen is shared.
Yep, that's all clear.
All right. Well, thank you to Shujun for the interesting presentation before me, leading in. Thank you to Luke for the introduction, and thank you all for attending. What you're going to hear a lot about, obviously, the more you attend throughout the day, is talking about kind of why we're doing this. And I think that that's one of the important key takeaways is that it's not just about what we're doing for today and what we're trying to achieve with this one particular project as a contained system. It's meant to kind of set up the longer term objectives of how do we conduct this methodology. And people asked about Twitter, and I'm not going to say X. I can't bring myself to do it. But when people say, oh, why are you this Twitter, and it's like, well, this is the idea is there's a certain ease, especially when we began with it, right? Like it's the low hanging fruit in terms of social media, but it's also about like, well, let's develop the methodology behind this because social media in one form or another is not going to go away. Like it may not be Twitter or X or Instagram or Facebook or whatever it is that's hot today. It may not be that thing in 10 years time. um Obviously, I'm of an age where MySpace was the thing for a while, and then I remember when I first signed up to Facebook, you actually had to have a university email address. Like it's not like you could just be anybody in the world who wanted one of those. So the way that we interact with social media changes over time. What those social media are going to change over time. Now it's TikTok in particular. But the point is it's going to be part of our lives, and you can kind of see how it's grown, for example, here in the UK over the past decade. 45% in 2011 said that they accessed the internet to use the social media. That grew to 70% in 2020. And if you look at it across age groups, like people under the age of 44, it was near ubiquitous, right? Like only 10% in that higher age group of 35 to 44 didn't say they didn't use it. And then like when you get down to the younger age group, it's almost everybody. And you're going to have generational change. Like we could sit and talk about, well, it doesn't, get to people who are 75 years old and older. And that's true today. In the future, people who are 75 years old and older are going to use social media because that's what they grew up with. That's part of who they are. Now, it may not be the same thing that the cool kids are using, right? It's not the same thing that their grandchildren are using, but they are going to be using it because everybody is going to be using it. It's not like all of a sudden you stop using the internet after you started using the internet. That's not generally how this has worked. So you can see now in 2020, the breakdown of what's popular and what's used out there. And Facebook, this is people who have an account. People talk about how much people use it for actual posting behaviors or other kinds of things versus, sometimes you just do it to peruse what some group that you're involved in. Facebook is an excellent free way for groups to have conversations amongst each other, like to share materials amongst the team, or for people who have children. I just use the example that my daughter, that's how her brownies unit communicates all of the goings on and what needs to happen. So you can use Facebook for a lot of different things. So you still have an account, even though you may not have these kinds of behaviors. You can see how this is broken down. TikTok, this came from 2020. I'm sure TikTok has probably cracked this list somewhere a little bit higher, and it's going to be one of the more popular ones. And it may not be TikTok in 5 years from now. I'm not promising you anything, but it's going to be something, as I said. So the idea is laying the groundwork for this. This is what we're trying to do, is laying the groundwork for the given fact that we are using social media in all of its different forms. We're going to continue to use social media in all of its different forms. And whatever that form may be, we want to be able to develop that methodology to kind of link that social media to our survey data that we're collecting simultaneously, because to some extent, one will bring us one type of data, the other will bring us the other type of data. Our idea is that if you combine them, you get a new and unique data source that kind of brings it this kind of different flavor and different opportunities to do research questions that you wouldn't otherwise get to do. And so we're trying to do that and tap into the high rich quality data that a longitudinal survey or a cross-sectional survey might bring with the real-time data that, and real life behavior, so to speak, of social media, and kind of get what that behavior may be. Real life obviously is a strong word. People may have different types of personas that they portray online, and that's something that I think people are concerned about. That, again, not tipping hats, that came out in some of the qualitative interviews that Curtis will talk about, and these kinds of ideas of uh, uh, what do people put out there? What can we link to the survey data? How can we do it? But we're also not trying to contrast. So much of the research that's been out there is, which data is better? I can show you my data is better than your data. And both sides are doing that. Both survey data is doing that. Social media people are doing that. Like, my data is better than your data, and let me show you how. And we're not saying that. We're saying that they're there to complement one another. They're two different data sources. There's no reason to expect that they're measuring the exact same thing. I don't know why people keep assuming that it's doing that. Like, there is no necessary reason to assume that they're doing the same thing and that they're going to tap the same continuums. Like, they're totally different inputs, therefore the outputs should be expected to be different. So why can't we blend those and kind of have a nice goal to kind of see what we can do when we combine those two data sets? And one of the things that I'm interested in, I am a professor of survey methodology, is trying to understand survey outcomes. So I'm trying to use these Twitter data to understand survey outcomes, right? So I'm interested in attrition and in measurement, and whether we can use this information to weight the data, or in a longitudinal study, can we trace respondents and kind of follow them and try and follow up and say, can we identify their new location to get them back into our surveys? And so this can be, obviously, I kind of come at it from a methodological standpoint, but people can use it in substantive research, trying to understand the outcomes of measures that they're interested in. The one limitation that obviously I think people tend to point to and is correct is that there's a limitation in the subgroup that we're analyzing. Not only there's a subgroup of people who use a particular social media, but the subgroup is limited to those who consent to allow us to access their social media and link it to their survey data. So there is that limitation. We'll talk other presentations later. We'll talk about consent to some extent, but we wanted to talk about now. What I'm talking about is trying to understand how we can use that data once we get to that subgroup of that data. The other thing that we're trying to look at is how can we take the data that we're creating for our research project in this particular instance and archive it and share it with the larger whole, right? Like the larger research community. Because it, is great for Luke and Shijun and Curtis, Paolo and I, whoever, who are on this particular research project to have this data and analyze it. But it limits its utility if we're not able to share it onward. And not only that, it limits the utility of this kind of work going forward. If people say, oh, you have to be able to share this, obviously some funding agencies require that, and so we want to be able to find a way to archive and share that. And again, that's a talk that's going on later in the afternoon. A lot of that talk is going to surround that as well, so I'm not going to go through that too much, but that is in particular some of the things that we're looking at. And we want to be able to take that archived and shared data and show the utility of it. And that's really what I want to be able to do right here, because we have taken that data and that we collected at the innovation panel. This is the very first time that we asked for consent, was all the way back in 2017. It was Luke, Curtis, and I at the time. And way back in 2017, in the 10th wave of the innovation panel, which is part of the Understanding Society, it's the experimental component of Understanding Society. At that wave, there was slightly more than 1,900 respondents with a response rate of 52% for people interested in survey metrics. But at that wave, we asked people, do you have a Twitter account? If they said yes, will you consent to link your Twitter data to these survey responses that you're giving us? For the people who said yes and gave us a Twitter handle, we went and collected those tweets and all that Twitter data. Now, this again, most of this data collection occurred before the change in the API. And so we had unlimited access for most of this range. And so we were able to collect all of their Twitter data in this range from June 2007, and we kept collecting until February 2023. So what we then did is we had this large amount of data, but what we were wanting to do is say, okay, how can we use that to deposit that, link that to our survey data, show again the utility of being able to archive, or showing how we can archive it, kind of creating data that we can archive and make it usable. And so our colleague and Paolo, who'll be talking later today, did a lot of work on putting this together and creating metrics out of that. And I want to talk about those metrics that he created that we ended up and archived and we shared. And I'll mention that again at the end, how we've archived that and where we've shared that. And the utility of linking that to the innovation panel. To give you some background on the linkage process, you could see that this is again 2017. 22% of respondents had that personal account, said they had a Twitter account. Of those, 171 consented, 163 provided a username. That's how this is read. Of those 163, we were able to find public accounts for 127. That means that we were able to access their metadata and we were able to access their tweets, right? So we were able to access all of their data. So those are what public accounts are. 16 accounts are private. So those you're still able to access their metadata. So this is how many people they follow. This includes how many tweets they have overall, but you can't actually access any of the tweets themselves. So you could see the general user level data about those people, those users, but you can't see anything about their tweet level data at all. 14 people, we couldn't find their username at all. That happens in any kind of these data sets. And then 6 people, we could access their accounts, but they had no tweets. So, some people just use Twitter just to look at the news. And in fact, most people, as you'll see, just kind of use it to peruse as opposed to be active posters. So this is how the data kind of come through to us. We created, and when I say we, I mean, again, largely this was driven largely by Paolo with this innovation data set. And there's 2 levels of data. We have the platform-based behavior, which is, aggregated to the Twitter level, the Twitter user at that aggregate level. So these could be the metadata. So again, how many people you follow or how many tweets you had. But these could also be aggregated from your tweet behaviors. And I'll show you some examples of those. Then there's also tweet metadata, and this is at the specific tweet level. So we have for each individual level tweet some information that we're able to share. Now, it doesn't include the tweet itself because that is disclosive. It doesn't include timestamps because theoretically timestamps are also disclosive. Because theoretically, if you could download all of the tweets at such and such time at, on a particular day, you could potentially work backward to identify who that user was who tweeted that. But these include the tweet metadata, but also Paolo did a lot of sentiment analysis, identified lexical features, so we could talk about word complexity or vocabulary complexity, the readability, the lexical diversity. All of these things are components that are also included in this data set. Some examples of the user metrics. So this is provided by the API. So this is not something that had to be derived. This is the number of people, like I said, that you're following, the number of people who follow you, the number of lists you belong to, for those of you who are aware of things on Twitter like lists. The total number of tweets posted, again, no information about what those tweets say. But then also derived from all of the tweets that we have, how many times you tweeted a reply to another user, how many times you quoted a tweet by the user, how many of those were original tweets by you, how many of them were retweets by you. So these are all things that were derived once we were able to collect the tweet data from the people who had the public account. Other ones are how many times your tweets were liked, or how many times that your tweets were retweeted. Those were also able to be derived from the tweets and included at that user level, aggregate level. How many days you were active on Twitter. And this is only identified through some posting behavior. Again, many respondents will, or people like myself, I mean, I've never tweeted anything. I don't have one tweet, but I would be one of those zero tweeters. But I get on Twitter and I like to see, I like to scroll through and see the information that I'm interested in and kind of see those kinds of things. And I think a lot of people are just interested in this passive use. And that won't be captured there because we won't be able to identify when people just logged in as opposed to actually posting behavior. But that's what that measure is. So these are some of the user metrics. This comes straight from the API. So sorry, I thought I got a chat saying that I was low on time. I had to check that real quick. I apologize. I had to, you can see the number of tweets. And this is because these are people who had accounts that we could access. So this includes private accounts. This includes zero tweet accounts. This includes any kinds of accounts that we could actually access. So this is not just public accounts where we could get the tweet data, because this is available through the API and through the metrics. One of the things that stand out whenever you look at any of the tweet behaviors, this is something that contrasts very heavily to survey data, is this variation. Like the standard deviation in almost every instance is many times over the measure of central tendency. The measure of variation is always much larger than the measure of central tendency, whatever that measure may be. And because people just vary so greatly in their behaviors on Twitter, a few people post 1 or 2 or 10 tweets, and then some people post 45,000 tweets, and that's not a made-up number. I mean, those are real numbers that we found in our data set, where people are posting close to 40,000 some tweets, and then a lot of people posting 1. And so you have this massive variation in the data set that you don't see, again, in survey data. If you saw this much variation in a survey data set, it would be hard to use to some extent. But you could see that across any of the measures that you have, which is followers, following, friends. These are from the tweet derived metrics, and you can see the drop in N because we could only get this from the public accounts where people had tweets. But again, you can see things like, and I'm just the only reason that these numbers are highlighted is just to show you partly the kind of behaviors that are out there, but also how large those standard deviations are relative to the means. You can really see that. What you can see, one of the reasons that I highlight quote original and quote retweet here is because it's showing you the kind of behaviors that people are actually acting on when they're on Twitter as well. These are among our survey respondents. A lot of people are posting their own original content, but almost equally, at least in terms of average, is the number of retweets. So it's not original content. I'm reposting someone else's content. So it's not a lot of original content necessarily. It's not necessarily what your respondent is saying. It's what your respondent is retweeting of somebody else and thinking about what that means, right? Like, does it mean they believe that, or they're just something that they're interested in? Or how do you treat a retweet? Because if you don't use retweets, you lose a lot of content, obviously. And that's something to be aware of. Now, this is what I linked it to. This is linking it to our actual survey data. And here, this is just giving you a breakdown of some basic demographics. You could see that our sample of consenters that we were able to collect data from tended to be slightly younger than our average on our sample. Were slightly had more likely to have a university education, slightly more likely to be married, and more likely to be employed. But again, you can see, relatively speaking, the standard deviations are not larger than the measures of central tendency, as you would probably expect in survey data, generally speaking. So I wanted to look at how we could use this data. I'm just using a couple of examples here, and one of the examples was like can we look at attrition? So I'm looking at, again, IP10 data. So from 2017, did people drop out into IP11? So that's the next wave. How many of them dropped out? And how can I use this Twitter data? Does this predict that dropout at all? And you could see from going from IP10 to IP11, 115, so 76% responded. And then you had 27 who dropped out with 10%, or 10, not 10%, 10 were ineligible. So I used all the respondent demographics, and I used the square root of all the Twitter count metrics, again, because of that huge variation, trying to control for that large variation in the Twitter data. I identified that there was nothing significant when I looked at this. But again, this is probably due in part to large or small sample sizes. And this is one of the limitations of the current data set. But again, the idea is, what can we possibly do? How are we building it to a larger cohesive idea about what could we possibly do? Here's some examples of what we may be able to do. The fact that no demographics, which we generally know are related to attrition, weren't related to attrition in this analysis, suggests that smaller sample size is an issue. One of the other ones that I looked at was well-being data. So, and I know I went over that fast, but basically I just used a logistic regression to predict attrition. Nothing came out significant using any of the Twitter user metrics, nor any of the respondent demographics. Somewhat more interesting, and so this is where I kind of spend a few more moments on, is there's a measure of general well-being, which is the GHQ scale, general health questionnaire, which is a very widely used measure. There's a scale that you can do by adding up all the measures, 0 to 36. In this case, in the GHQ scale, 36 is the worst well-being that you can have. So I just ran a basic general linear model, again, using the same idea, all of the Twitter user metrics that I had. So this, again, is not using any of the tweet level metrics, and all of the respondent demographics. Here, I did find a relationship between Twitter behaviors and well-being. So the number of people that the user is following, the number of user retweets, both are related to higher scores, meaning lower well-being, and being female also led to lower or higher scales, lower well-being. And that's a general finding that's been reproduced in other studies. So that gives it some kind of consistency, at least. And those were the only three that were significant. I'm not going to posit why necessarily at the moment the number of followers or the number of people you're following or the number that you're retweeting is related to your well-being. That's not the goal at the moment. The goal is, look, I could do this, and I could show you how this could be done. And social people who use social media data and survey data, how can you use that? Um, Anyways, we'll talk more about the deposit of the data, but these data that I just showed you, these have all been deposited at the UK Data Archive. This is for study 9208. You can go search it up. Here's the link on the slides. I think we're going to share the slides. If not, I'm happy to email people this link. It's easy enough to find. Comes with the code book, the data set, how to link it to the innovation panel data set. Anybody is free to use that. We would obviously welcome people to kind of explore that and see how it's potentially usable. Hopefully, some interesting research comes out of it. And that's really what I wanted to talk about. I'll leave it there. The idea, again, is that this is the starting point, right? Not the end. And so we're just kicking this off. We're hoping that other people pick it up and take it farther and kind of go from there. As Shajun mentioned, you still can get some of this data for free if you wanted to go collect your own and do some linkage. It's very limited, but there is some out there that's free. And obviously, we want to expand and encourage other people to expand to other social media. And I hope that wasn't too long. So I'll leave it there.
Not at all, Tarek. Thanks. I mean, I think Tarek's presentation there gives everyone watching. We've had to be quite selective in what we present. It's been quite difficult because we could talk to you for days about this stuff. But thanks so much for giving us a great overview, Tarek. There are questions, as you can imagine. The first one, this is very much related to the sorts of work that this group will go on to do, but it's asking us whether we can talk more about the data it's possible to get from data donation versus an API and the costs involved to recruit participants willing to donate their data. I think that'll come up a little bit more later in the day, but we could address it a little bit now. Obviously, with USIP, it's different because they're already in a panel. So
yeah, and I think I think a key point of what we want to be able to do is to kind of keep that panel going and asking for data donation. I think that, so to kind of talk about data donation briefly, I mean, that obviously is one of the ways that people are trying to go towards because laws require the social media sites to allow you to access your own data. So it overcomes any of these cost issues or accessing the API issues that you as a researcher might have. We are proposing that. Other people are proposing that. I mean, I'm working on other research projects where people are looking at that, or I've reviewed papers, read papers. I think that just the goal will be identifying how we get people to do that, right? It's one thing to sit and say, yeah, I'll let you get my Twitter data, and here's my Twitter handle, right? Have at it. It's another thing for me to like, okay, let me go log into my Twitter account, figure out exactly how I need to go download this data, open my email program or whatever it is, or find the portal that you've provided to me and upload that data to you in that manner. Not saying that that's the most difficult thing that you're ever going to ask a respondent to do, but it's, two steps ahead of like, just here's my Twitter handle. So it's every step that you ask a respondent to do more is a step that you're likely to lose them in that process. So we're hopeful, but there hasn't been enough done to show that this is definitely going to work or definitely not going to work. Like there's just not enough known in terms of that yet.
yes, I would say the people, other people that are looking into this include colleagues at GESIS in Germany who've done a little work on this. There's at least one other method of collecting data as well, which is through browser extensions. But that's, technically that needs a lot of maintenance. Thanks, Tarek. I'm sure we'll come back to that subject later in the day anyway. Fab. Next question. Oh, here's a good one. What's the source for the social media in the UK numbers that you used early in your presentation? Is it Ofcom?
Yeah, sorry, I should have put that on my slide. It's Ofcom, from the Ofcom 2020 data. I'm sure there's more. I should go look, find their most recent data, but that comes from Ofcom, yeah.
It's fine. Question from Erwin. Have you looked at collecting metadata on LinkedIn accounts, and do we know if it's possible?
So LinkedIn is uh, so I don't know how possible it is to some extent. Now, here's what we know about LinkedIn data is that LinkedIn has been um, very tried to limit their access to their API a lot, right? Like they try and limit their access to their API. The ability to limit that is one thing. The ability for us to go and access LinkedIn data, publicly available LinkedIn data, and kind of scrape it or whatever terminology you want to use is a different one. There's been some actual legal precedents in the United States about the ability to scrape LinkedIn data, because the idea with LinkedIn data is unlike Twitter or whatever, there is no expectation that your LinkedIn data is private, more or less. Nobody signs up LinkedIn to kind of keep it all themselves. This kind of defeats the purpose. So we have looked at LinkedIn. The way that we're looking at it is from more of that scraping point of view, which requires a lot of hoops to jump through in terms of identifying people. If you have a somewhat unique name and position, like myself, there's not a lot of other Professor Tarek Bagal's kind of thing in the world. Makes it easy for you to find my LinkedIn profile. If you're, I don't want to pick anybody's name and be like, oh, that's a common name, but use a name like Tom Smith, which is a more common name, and you worked at the most common company, common employer in the UK. You have some place like Tesco or some place like that. It's a lot harder to identify that singular person. And so we've been looking at methods to try and identify how we can identify the right person, given the identifiers that a respondent can give us within the survey. So that's kind of how we've been exploring the LinkedIn linkage perspective more.
And I guess it's that difference, isn't it, between like deterministic and probabilistic
Yeah.
matching and certainty. And there's some interesting ethical issues there because if you identify a LinkedIn account that you think probabilistically is the right one, and then you link that to survey data, but you've got it wrong, like what are the implications of that? Is how much of a big deal is that? So there's lots of interesting stuff around that. And this research group is currently looking into doing some more work around that. Right, next question. It's a long one, Tarek, so I'm just going to read it and you can ask me to rephrase it. So from Anja, what other problems do you see with regard to sampling and the consequences for the analysis of social media data? With the selection bias towards internet users who give their consent, the question arises as to whether inferential statistics can be used in the analysis at all. So what does statistical significance mean in this instance, and to which group are generalizations made? It's a good question, actually.
It is a very good question, and there is there is more thought being put towards this. I don't think that this was necessarily the initial thought that people were putting in towards this, but I saw a paper that was recently published by some researchers in Germany who were actually trying to, because the idea is that you have survey data about those consenters, right? And so you could create weights in the way that we would create non-response weights, but with a better set of variables sets, right? Because you have a more complete set of information. And they found that while the creating those weights overcomes some of the consent bias, it does not erase it. There's still this consent bias in the data set. Now the question, so that's consent bias, right? That's saying from the people who you asked to consent to who didn't consent. That's one form of bias. The other one is who are you generalizing to, right? And that's a different another part of the question. And that's a very important question as well. And I think that that's always going to be part of the question. I think that you can't sit and say that it's necessarily generalizable to everyone in the population, right? And so that's, you could try and do things like weighting, but there's always going to be the limitation that people who use Twitter are unique, right? People who use TikTok or Instagram or whatever, they're all self-selected and are doing that for some whatever purpose there is for them to do that. And it's hard to sit and say that that's generalizable to the larger population. Does
And
that mean that it's not informative? I would say no. I mean, I still think that it's still informative. It's just that you have to acknowledge the potential limitations of who your population is.
And in the next session, Curtis is going to talk about improving consent linkage and the bias introduced by non-consent. And also, Xu Jun is going to talk about the associations of consent to link with activity, frequency, variety, the sorts of things people do on their smartphones. So we will come back to that in a lot more detail later. Thank you.
And by the way, I also would like to just kind of tie it back to the very beginning point of what it is that I was saying, which was like social media is not going to go away. So it may be 25% of the population now or whatever use Twitter. There may never be a social media that 100% of the population uses. That's never going to probably be the case. But I imagine if it was, it would be some kind of mind control thing. Like that's how I kind of see that in the future. Is if everybody was on the one social media, like there would be something else going on about that. But people will be using social media more or less nearly universally, and so maybe there's a way to combine those kinds of sources together, and so you have multiple sources of social media and the survey data, right, all working together as opposed to just a dichotomy, a two version form of this, which is what we're looking at the moment.
Cool. I just, from a slightly comic perspective, I just want to say there is actually a Tom Smith here today in the name you used for looking up LinkedIn. So it's like, so yeah. Sorry, Tom. Lovely. Okay, a message from a different Tom, Thomas. Brilliant, enjoyed the chat. Could you talk a bit more about how you treated missing data non-response in IP11?
Let me go back. Treated missing data and non-response at IP11.
Yeah.
So IP11 is the wave after the IP10. So right now, non-response, in terms of who didn't respond, I just basically looked at whether they were in the survey data or not. Like in terms of how we treat that within the survey more generally, if you're interested. And I'm sorry if I'm not fully understanding the question, but more generally, the in this particular analysis, I didn't weight the data, right? Like I didn't use non-response weights because the non-response weights aren't designed for social media consent bias. So they're not appropriate for that. But in IP, there's we do include weights for income kind of missingness. There's imputation methods, but there was very limited treating of missing data. I mean, otherwise in my regression models, if there was missing data, they got dropped.
Yeah, Thomas, if that's answered it, fantastic. If you want to clarify in this session or later on, please go ahead and submit a different question. We're happy to talk around it. Okay, question from Alessandra. In your last slide, Tarek, you mentioned that the geolocation of the account is one of the pieces of information available. What does geolocation refer to? Is it account level provided by respondents when they set up the account? Do you want to lead on this, and I'm happy to come in?
So I actually, my understanding is because when I made this slide, I had asked June about what was there. This is if they put the information in there, right? Like, but I could be wrong. And so it's not available for, I mean, it's only there if you allow it to be there. So it's not available for a lot of people, I assume. But yes, please.
Yeah, so there are different levels of geography depending on what you're looking at. It was the case years and years ago. A latitude and longitude would come with the individual tweet, and it still does if people have geo services turned on. But it's very interesting because I saw a paper which mapped this once that basically it was quite high. You could follow someone's commuting journey based on their Twitter activity, and I saw maps that did that. It was quite terrifying, actually. But then the amount of geotag tweets significantly dropped. And the main driver for that was that Apple changed the privacy settings for location services. and did not default them to on. And as a result, it hugely dropped. And now the proportion of I mean, Shuzhen might well know, the proportion of tweets with geotagging switched on is incredibly low. What we have instead is kind of some proxies where people choose to tell us they are. Shuzhen, sorry, this is your area of expertise, really. Um, am I right in thinking it does provide you with some location information, which Twitter or X infers, or have I just imagined that?
Yes, it's suggested that the geolocation rate was quite low at the tweet level, and it just provided the place ID as well as the coordinated tab, that is point ID as well as the geolocation metrics. Yes, this actually, I think if it's with limited data size, it's the value of this at the tweet level is not very huge, but at the account level, because they will also provide the geolocation at the profile information. That would be very interesting because some people would disclose their geolocation and others will not. That may represent an intention to disclose their personal information.
Thanks, Shuzhen. There are so if you were when you're linking to survey data, it's fine. You know that everybody's given you permission is in your sample, so that makes it easy. And you know roughly where they live, you know exactly where they live, but you might do it by region if you're sharing or archiving that data. If you're collecting Twitter data generally, you can probably be confident that your bounding box, if you like, is all happening within the UK, and that'll be based on mobile mass signals and things that are triangulated. Beyond that, it gets a bit difficult to do. And I mean, my own profile says locates me as in Cardiff, but that's not where I am now. That's not where I live. That's just where I work. So there's also this idea of what is the profile presenting? Is people's location where they live or where they work? And some people will say they live in certain locations because it's socially desirable. So there's a lot going on there. Other things you can use as well, which I've used in the past, which is quite good. If you want to know whether someone lives in the UK, is to check their language settings. So do they have UK English? That can help a little bit, but it is tricky and it is messy. Thank you. I can't see any other questions. Tom Smith has announced that he's famous. Absolutely.
You go, yeah. I'll take you to all of the presentations I ever give on LinkedIn, and I'll spread the name of Tom Smith across the world. Or
Marvelous.
I'll find a different name if because I like. And the funny thing is, like, I didn't realize obviously there was a person named Tom Smith in the presentation. So sorry if like.
It's fine. If you're in Wales, you would have come up with something Jones, probably.
Yeah, see, that's the thing. Maybe that's what I should have gone with next time is Jones. Tom
Thanks,
Jones. Tom Jones. There
Tom
we go.
Jones. There we go. That's the example from now on.
Yes.
Thanks so much, Tarek. That was brilliant. Thank you, Shuzhen. Thank you so much to the people who come to this session, partly for giving the time, but the questions have really stimulated us and got the discussion going. And as you can see, we are very keen to talk around this stuff because we got so much we want to get across. So thank you for being engaged. Please do come to the next session. The next session is at 12:30, and I believe someone is going to share the link in chat now. Doopy doopy doo. What else? Yes, and the next session will be going much more into consent. So just to give you a sort of trailer, if you like, Curtis is going to talk about understanding motivations behind consent and improving consent linkage and how question ordering, presentation of information impacts on things. I think he's presenting about 4 separate strands of work that we did in one. So I wish him luck in getting all that across. And Shuzhen is coming back to talk about associations to consent to link data with relating to activity frequency. So we hope that's of interest to you, and we'd love to see you there. And you have what?
Sorry, did you I wasn't laughing at you, Luke. I just saw this comment from John Burton where it's like you should definitely use that. It's not unusual. Isn't that great? That's so good.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
so good. I like that. That's really good.
I definitely think you should try and squeeze. We should try and squeeze that into every presentation now.
Yeah,
Thank you, Jonathan. Much appreciated.
I'm going to use that now.
Gotta have a bit of fun with these things. Thanks all. We'll see you at 12:30. Take care. Reach out to us at any point via email, via our study page. It's been circulated. If you want to ask us anything offline as well, we'd love to hear from you and what you think. Thanks very much. See you in a bit.
Thank you.
Thank you.